Okay, so we're gonna roll into our intermediate painting lessons, but first we need to talk about colors, specifically color matching and just a little bit of extra information about colors. Not being able to achieve the color that you want can be really frustrating and can also result in wasting paint, and nobody wants that. I'll be clear when I say that matching colors is as much of a skill as anything, so it does take a little bit of practice. You need to kind of get to know your paint, but there are some basic color guidelines that you can learn, kind of keep them in mind, and it'll help you along with that journey. This isn't really going to be about color theory. There are hundreds of those videos on YouTube. You can find them from people who are formally educated in the topic. But before we move on to our intermediate paintings, I just want to make sure that you guys have some color matching tools and ideas, and that should help the intermediate and the more advanced paintings be a little less stressful. You can then focus on building other skills needed to accomplish those paintings. So let's talk about some terms you've probably heard of before, and maybe you think they're interchangeable, but they're actually not. This may go by on the screen pretty quickly. You can just pause it and write down stuff or read stuff a little slower as needed. But I'm talking about hues, tints, tones, and shades. You know, somebody might say like, oh, you know, it has a little bit of a red tint to it, or like a blue tone, and that stuff kind of all sounds the same, but none of that actually means the same thing. So hues, those are just pure colors. Something that has a tint to it is a hue plus white. So pure colors plus a little bit of white. Something that has a tone is the hue plus gray. So that pure color plus a little bit of gray. And shade is a little more intuitive. It's just the hue, that pure color, plus black. It's what something might literally look like in the shade. Understanding paint colors is a little bit easier than it seems, especially with something like acrylics. Acrylics are pretty straightforward, but unlike what you were taught in, kindergarten or first grade, in painting we don't base our primary colors off of red, yellow, and blue. Instead, we use magenta in place of red, we still use yellow, but then we use cyan in place of blue. This results in very full colors, and you can still achieve the blue and the red using the cyan and the magenta. You get a much more vivid spectrum using CMYK, and C is cyan, M is magenta, Y is yellow, K is black. Black is represented by K because, well, B is already used in blue, and the K can be related to key line or key plate, which in printing, the key plate is usually what impressed black ink. So we get the K from that. And then of course there is white. So really when you're painting, and again this lesson primarily focuses on acrylics, but this can be applied across many different types of paint. Truly, all you need are those primary colors plus black plus white, and you can mix just about anything. When it comes to color matching what it is you're trying to paint, whether that's a landscape or you're making some fan art of your favorite cartoon, whatever it is, if you're using some kind of reference, which most artists do, you need to train yourself to paint what you see and not what you know. This is taught in a lot of art schools, and you'll hear a lot of artists say this, and there's a reason for that. For instance, we've been working with the game Fez for the beginning acrylic painter lessons and for the very next painting. So we're gonna look at Gomez, which is the main character in Fez. When you look at Gomez, your brain knows, okay, Gomez is white and gray. Well, is it really though? Take a second to actually see what colors are happening in Gomez, because your brain is going to think, all right, Gomez is white, so his shadows are going to be gray. But that's actually not what's happening here. More correctly, that shadow area of Gomez is not just gray, it's actually a green tone, which remember your tones are your hue, so your color, plus gray. There are some ways that you can detect this. Over time, you may just be able to look at it and to be able to tell, hey, this is a little bit on the cooler side of a straight neutral gray, and then you may be able to pull that green out of it just by looking at it. But if you can't do that, and sometimes even the most trained artists have troubles or they're not necessarily certain, there is no shame in using a gray swatch or a color wheel of some kind to help your eye determine what's actually happening with the colors in front of you. And if you just remember that for most things, you can use your primary colors plus white and black to achieve pretty much anything in front of you, it's a little less scary to try to mix those colors to come up with what you're seeing. When I start the first intermediate lesson, I'm not going to spend a bunch of time explaining color matching. The idea is for you to take this video beforehand, or maybe even during that video, and to let it help you guide yourself into making the correct color choices. To make that a little bit easier to follow along, I'm going to switch up the paints that I'll be using, and instead of just using the plethora of different colors and tints and tones and whatever that I have, I'm just going to use those primary colors plus the black and white for the entire next painting. You are welcome to do the same, or if you have more colors at your disposal, or maybe color matching isn't even that important to you, that's totally fine as well. But I want to show you that with the smallest amount of resources, you can really come up with a pretty good painting with colors that are pretty accurate. If you want to follow along with this painting series to kind of see how this turns out, or maybe give it a try yourself, you can check out the beginner series that's already published, or check back in next week for the beginning of the intermediate series. You're also welcome to subscribe so you're a little less likely to miss that when it gets published. If you have any additional comments, you can just leave them below or hit me up on Twitter.